Jesus said to Simon, "Do you mind taking me out in your boat? I think it would be best if we went out a little bit in the water so I could have some room to talk to all of these fine folks." Figuring he owed Jesus a favor, Simon agreed. Without even thinking, Simon and the others grabbed their nets and set out with Jesus onto the water. And as the story goes, Jesus taught and preached to the crowd gathered on the beach. At lunchtime, as lunchtime rolled around, people began to leave, heading for home and for chores to do. By now, as you can imagine, poor Simon and the other fishers were exhausted. It was way beyond time for them to go home and get some rest. Enough is enough, Simon thought. Let's go. But Jesus had other plans. "Tell me, Simon," Jesus said, "how did your fishing go last night?" "Lousy," Simon replied. "We fished all night long and didn't catch anything, not even a minnow. It was useless." "Thanks for asking. But right now, we're tired as all get out, and we would just want to get some rest. Now that the crowd is gone, let's head back to shore, okay?" "Well," said Jesus, "I've been thinking about heading out a little bit further. Why don't you try fishing one more time before you go home?" Simon didn't quite know what to do. He and his friends weren't stupid. They were professional fishers. They knew the lake and the ledges where fish congregated. They knew the kind of weather that brought a good catch. They knew the time to fish and which nets to use. So here they all were, out in the middle of the lake with a guy from the hills who knew nothing about fish, who was trying to tell them, who were the experts and professional fishermen, how to do their job. Can't you just see Simon and the others rolling their eyes and mumbling about what a waste of time this all was? What nonsense. The last thing they needed that day was a crazy fellow giving them fishing advice. Jesus asked, "Simon, did you say something? Is there some kind of problem here?" Simon spoke up. "You know, Jesus, your idea about fishing isn't going to be worth the effort. We've been fishing all night and just aren't out there. Besides, we've had it. We want to go home. And we didn't bring the right sort of nets for daytime fishing anyway. We're calling it quits." "Not so fast," said Jesus. "Just do this one more favor for me before you go home. What's the worst that can happen?" And so they went, making their way into the deep waters, Simon and the others shaking their heads, complaining all the way. "This isn't going to work. This is nonsense. We could all be at home, sitting by the fire, eating dinner, and all the time Jesus just kept smiling." When they arrived in the deep waters, Simon let down his nets, knowing that he and the others would soon be dragging the net empty. The noise was unbelievable. Fish fins and tails were flapping all over the place. Fish were fighting to jump into the nets. Simon couldn't handle it all alone. His nets began to break from the weight of the fish. So Simon called for help and the other boat pulled up. Fish were everywhere. They were on top of each other. The fish weighed so much the boats were beginning to sink. The men had caught enough fish to put the Gorton fishermen to shame. Every school cafeteria for miles around would be serving fish sticks for months. The stores would run out of tartar sauce. That's how much fish they caught. Now, it's one thing to have a good day's catch to sell at the market and maybe have enough left to ship to surrounding towns too, but it's altogether a different kettle of fish when there's more than the boats could handle. This was abundance way beyond what anyone could ever imagine. It was too much, and that scared Simon to death. He was so overwhelmed, he knelt down in the boat and yelled at Jesus, "Go away! I'm not worth all this. It's too much for a simple fisherman like me. Jesus, I'm just an ordinary sinner. I can't handle all this holiness. Leave me alone." And that's when Jesus reached out a loving hand, pulled Simon up, and said to him, "Don't be afraid. It's all right. Come with me. Bring along your friends and follow me." And you know what? Just like that, Simon, Peter, and the others left their boats, all those fish, their homes, their families, and followed Jesus. Now, isn't this a great story? This is a miracle story if there ever was one. Think about it. Jesus showing up just as the fishermen had run out of hope. Think of it. Fish flying all over the place where just hours before there hadn't even been a minute. And miracle of miracles. Jesus calls a bunch of ordinary people, sinners who doubted and made all kinds of mistakes. People like you and me. That's who Jesus called that day. And they followed him. Just like that, they left everything and set out with Jesus. They didn't have a clue what they were getting into. They just knew that they had to follow this itinerant preacher from Nazareth. There was just something about him that gave them hope. Here was a presence, a spirit in him that compelled these men to risk it all that day. "Here I am, Lord, send me." That's what Isaiah ended up saying after he was overwhelmed by God's presence that day in the temple. He didn't have a clue either. All he knew was that he had some sort of vision of crazy, fiery seraphs flying around the throne of God. Can't you just picture these guys flying around us? How scary is that? Imagine these huge creatures with 6 wings, 2 that covered their eyes, 2 wings covering their feet, and flying around us with the other 2 wings. They must have caused quite a stir as they flew by, calling out to each other with loud, piercing voices. The commotion was so loud and disturbing that the pillars of the temple shook, and the smoke from the seraph's fire filled the temple. Venture to guess that if any of us had been Isaiah, we would have cried out something a whole lot stronger than "Woe is me." Isaiah was filled with fear and awe, standing there in the presence of God. In that moment, Isaiah felt small and insignificant, unclean, unworthy. In that moment of despair, one of those crazy winged creatures approached Isaiah with a live hot coal and pressed it to the prophet's lips. And miracle of miracles, in that very instant, Isaiah was filled with wonder and amazement, assured that he had no reason to be afraid because he had been transformed by the power of God. Isaiah had no idea what lay ahead for him as he answered God's call. Isaiah stepped out onto an unknown path with faith and hope, the assurance that God had called him to come along and follow. It's a good thing for us that people like Isaiah and Simon, Peter, James, and John, and the others decided to follow God, isn't it? They went ahead and took the chance. They ventured out into the unknown, willing to have their lives transformed. Thank goodness there are folks like them to do that sort of foolish stuff. The fact is that most of us just can't bring ourselves to give it all up and answer God's call. When God calls us, we answer as Simon did at first. "Get out of here, God. Go away. I have other things to do today. There's no sense bothering with me. I can't help you. Besides, I have plans to move to Australia." One church scholar has written about people he calls kindergarten Christians. That's the sort of Christian most folks are eager to be. These are the people who come to church on Sunday morning. They sing the hymns, they say the prayers, they sit through the sermon, and they might put something in the offering plate. They may even stay around once in a while for milk and cookies, but not much else. And they go home and go about their business for the week, figuring that they're finished with being a Christian until next Sunday. They can forget all about it. These are the folks who are stuck and just aren't able to get themselves to first grade, according to this author. You see, first grade and beyond requires some involvement in the life of the congregation. Being a first grade Christian means exploring faith, living faith, serving, and following the call of Christ. If we want to get out of kindergarten, we need to acknowledge that we belong to God and that God has called each one of us to come and follow, to leave the comfortable and familiar and venture into the deeper waters of faith. Friends, life is tough. Oftentimes we find ourselves failing to catch even that one little minnow. We're afraid that if we answer God's call to come along, we might not do it quite right. It's as if we're afraid of failing and disappointing God and everybody else. It's no wonder we don't want to take any chances and we try to keep our distance from God. Here's the good news. God will catch us anyway. And when God does catch us and grab hold of us, our lives will be forever changed. We will have graduated from being kindergarten Christians. It won't be easy or comfortable or even good all the time, but it will be worth it. Richard Wing, who once served as the senior pastor of First Community Church in Columbus, tells this story. As a boy, I was never very good at catching things, except once in a while. I tried to catch a pony to ride and failed. The butterfly trip was a disaster. I tried catching frogs, but didn't try too hard because I didn't know what to do. Fish weren't my favorite for eating, so catching them was no treat. Besides, I knew I'd have to eat them. I was never good at catching things. A major church denomination had as its theme, "Catch the Spirit." As usual, the church got it backward, Richard remarked. We are not to set our sights on catching or getting, but allowing ourselves to be caught. We are invited to be caught by a spirit that will help us make a giving instead of a living. People are in search of God and will write endless numbers of books telling us how to find God. The truth of the gospel is that we cannot find God, but there are places we can go and things we can do where God will find us. The joy in Christian living isn't about catching, but in the vulnerability of being caught by the one who made us in the first place. Catch the Spirit? No, you can't. Be caught by the Spirit, of course. Life begins there. I pray that each of us may be caught by God